welcome everyone to the Innovative Universities webinar, where guests at the helm of institutions that may change how we understand and practice higher education in the future answer questions from us and from you. This is the last webinar of season 2. We have had 13 webinars so far. This is the 14th. I'll remind you briefly about the format. So the webinar will last exactly 60 minutes. It will begin with a short introduction about today's case, London Interdisciplinary School, and continue with a hands-on discussion about how it operates and how you may implement some of its approaches. If you have a question, please share it in the Q&A section of Zoom. And to remind you, behind the mic, we have Isak and myself co-hosting, the steering committee helping us select the cases, and our management team led by Alexander Martinchuk, making the show happen in the first place. All webinar recordings are later available on YouTube. So Isak, please, the mic goes to you now to introduce our speaker.
Yes, it's my pleasure to have the last seminar of this season with distinguished speaker and visionary who is going to tell us about the experience of very unusual university, London Interdisciplinary School, which took very provocative name from the very beginning. And you know, we spoke already with a number of founders of unusual universities, and it's what has always really impressed me is the courage of these people. And definitely our guest today, Carl Gombrich, is a very brave person. He is brave because he is himself multidisciplinary. Carl, I would have a question. Are you multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary person? And
it's a really, do you want me to answer that now or in due course?
Or maybe in due course, yeah. And because Carl, I really envy a person who tried himself in arts. Carl was an opera singer, and also he has degrees in mathematics and physics and philosophy. So probably it would be difficult to find more appropriate person to lead such a project. What this project is about, how this London Interdisciplinary School is trying to make the buzzword interdisciplinarity a reality. So Professor Gombrich, it's our pleasure to welcome you today, and the floor is yours. And after your presentation, we have a lot of questions.
Thank you, Isak. Thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. Just you speaking has provoked a lot of thoughts in me, but maybe we'll come back to them later. Let me do my presentation first on the university, and I'm sure many of the themes you hinted at there will bubble up as we go through. So, as Professor Frumin says, I'm the founding dean of this new university, the London Interdisciplinary School, which in the UK we're fairly confident is the first university to get its own degree awarding powers from its inception in about 40 to 50 years, since Warwick University. Because usually in the UK, and probably in environments you're familiar with, new universities are not allowed to just grant degrees. They have to grant the degrees of other universities for several years, often 5 or 7 years, to check their bona fides, as one says, to check that they're sort of academically respectable, that their systems are in place, that they're not corrupt, and so on. But I think it's testament to our vision, to our originality, and the quality of what we're trying to do that we were granted those powers at our inception by the UK government, as well as the University Quality Assurance, independent quality assurance body. So we were founded around 2017. There were various steps in the process, but that's a good point to think about when our actual founders came together. The license came through actually a couple of years after that, but the two founders of our institution are an educationalist, Ed Fido, who set up a school in the UK, and Chris Person, who's actually a tech entrepreneur. So there's a whole discussion there about the cultures of entrepreneurialism versus universities. But I joined in 2019 when we really got through the regulatory stages. And then we took our first intake of students in 2021, undergraduate intake, master's students in 2022, first graduates of undergraduates 2024, just last year, and we're launching a new MBA and a couple of more masters next year. On there, I've put a little bit about the funding, which itself is a separate talk, but very interesting. We're very unusual in the UK in being fully private, but we're not philanthropic. We're a social impact investment, which means our investors are not looking for profit, but they are looking for some social change, which is good because it makes us constantly try to be, as Isaac said, brave, and to challenge the system and to challenge what people think higher education could and should be. So, but it does mean we have to be honest financially. We have to not spend crazy money on crazy things, and we have to try to make ends meet, which I like. I've been in education really full-time 20 plus years now, but before that I was an opera singer, as Isaac said, and very different worlds, and your attitude to money in both those worlds is very different, and this is yet another different take on money. But I like the fact that we have to be financially honest and not rely on large handouts or debts which we can't pay back. But relevant to that, and it's something I said I'd touch on to Isaac, is our student numbers. We are still very small. Our total student body is only around 150 across 3 undergraduate cohorts and 1 master's cohort. We're growing at about 15 to 20% a year, which in any other sphere is fantastic if you compound that. But of course, there are financial pressures we need to meet as well. And one thing we're doing alongside this is we're doing some professional development, which has been very successful. We teach courses on leadership, on systems thinking, on sustainability, leveraging some of the skills of our interdisciplinary faculty. And that is proving to be a helpful, though not entirely sufficient, revenue stream. And I'm very interested in, again, that a university like ours, which is very progressive in many ways and very intellectual in many ways, has found some purchase in the professional audiences, and they like what we do, and they like to come on courses with us. So that's an interesting angle to what we do as well. Next slide, please. So why do we exist? Well, we exist because at the highest possible level, I suppose, we feel that universities very largely, I mean, overwhelmingly throughout the modern world, do not reflect the way the world actually is. And there's a great deal one can say about that, from the rise of the internet to now to AI to all sorts of other things. But in the UK in particular, the curriculum gets narrower and narrower and narrower from the age of sort of 14 to when you graduate from undergrad at 21. And then when you graduate, you sort of have to invert that picture on the left. And you go from very narrow specialism, maybe when you join one job, and very quickly you realize you need all sorts of other skills and knowledge to do your job properly, anywhere outside academia. So in a sense, and perhaps unsurprisingly, academia is set up to perpetuate academia, but we're in a situation in the developed world now where 98-point-something% of students are not going into academia after they graduate. So why are they made to study exactly as if they were going to be academics when they're not? And of course, when they leave the university, their careers look like things on the right. They are networked. That is the dominant metaphor of our age in almost anything we talk about. And network knowledge, social networks, network careers require a more interdisciplinary mindset, skill set, ability to function, and all sorts of things. So we're trying basically to create a higher education which maps more faithfully onto the actual world of our graduates. In a nutshell, I think that's what we're trying to do. Of course, that brings enormous intellectual, conceptual, organizational challenges. I'll tell you about those more in a moment, but it seems to me there's nothing more important than trying to map an education to reality. And so really that is what we're trying to do. And we see interdisciplinarity as being a very important part of that step in that mapping between education and reality. Next slide, please. So Our curriculum only has two parts at the highest level of conception. We have real world problems, so-called complex real world problems, or wicked problems as they're sometimes called. And we have methods to tackle those problems. And I'll come back to that. So methods isn't listed on this slide, but I'll come back to that later. So really, instead of disciplines, we teach problems and methods. But we also want our students, and this is the second image here of one of our students, we want our students to think about the work they're doing. My colleague and the founder, Ed Fido, has this really nice characterization of education that in most formal education, you're only learning for two people. One is yourself, and generally to pass the grades, or if you're lucky or interested in your subject. And the two is the person who's assessing your work. And that's it. And when you leave formal education, everything you do in work is generally for or in the service of somebody else or something else. So we wanted to bake into the curriculum that at many touch points throughout the academic curriculum, the students are also thinking, who cares about this apart from me and my assessor? Why should a local business care about this? Why should the government care about this? Why should my parents or my family care about this? So we want the academic work, the intellectual work, to be closely tied to at several touch points to the value of other people. And as part of that, we talk about ourselves as a porous university. That's the third image here. So we have a lot of outside industry and governmental bodies and startups and creatives coming into our space to tell them about the complex problems that they are wrestling with. And we let our students go out a lot. We do a lot of internships. We do a lot of work for and with different organizations and individuals. Again, trying to take academic and intellectual knowledge and thinking outside the academy to where it has some value. Next slide, please. So I set up the faculty here. I employed about 20 faculty initially, about 14 full-time equivalents. So some were part-time, but most were full-time. And we spent about 18 months wrestling with these basic high-level principles and working out what that meant on the ground, what modules we would offer, what courses we would offer, how assessments would look, what would be compulsory, what would be an elective, and so on. And then quite near the start of term, or maybe even once term had started, we had a few students around, we really thought we needed a kind of formulation, some sort of mission principles to guide what we were doing. So I like to work like that in these complex projects. I'm actually really touched and moved that Isaac says I'm brave. I think that's one of the highest values, and I don't think we see enough of it in academia. I don't think I'm very brave at all, but I've realized quite late in life, in my 40s really, that I'm a certain type of risks I can take, I'm comfortable with. Not financial, I'm terrible with that. Not physical, I'm not good with that risk. But intellectual risk, I don't mind taking. And we'd taken a lot of risks, really, to set up this curriculum and be brave. But we didn't really have top-down principles at that point. We'd worked as a team to create this thing, which we miraculously, really, we agreed on to a very large extent. So we had set up a workshop, and I was terrified that at this workshop, all our hard work would fall apart, because I wanted to find two principles to guide our curriculum. But in about 20 minutes, all that hard work of teamwork, of dialogue, of deliberation, of reading what other people done, came together in these two principles. And these two principles, which guide our curriculum, are that in order to tackle complex problems, we need to pursue multiple perspectives. So that brings in your multidisciplinarity, and then we can talk about what interdisciplinarity means alongside that. But it means that whenever we tackle a complex real-world problem in our curriculum, we will take 2 or 3 or 4 disciplinary perspectives on the problem before we even let the students produce some of their own work. And the second thing we agreed on was that we need to think in terms of networks and relationships. So I've already mentioned networks as the dominant metaphor for our age, but I think particularly in these social problems, we don't teach students enough about the value of relationships. It's a cliche, but again, perhaps academia doesn't think about this enough, that nothing gets done unless the relationship between the decision makers and the power brokers is a good one. We know this every day from the media, from watching Trump or Xi or Putin bomb around the world. I mean, we don't really teach students about this. It's great to have a report on how to alleviate poverty, but if nobody cares and nobody likes you, no one's ever going to read that report, let alone implement it. So we encourage students a lot to think about, again, who cares about this project? And we actually bake into some of the curriculum that they have to write an email to a local policymaker and get a response that shows that the person will at least read that report. Or we say, can you set up a workshop where you're going to prove to us that 3 people who could implement this idea will come to that workshop. So I like this in a way because it's not academic, but I think it's immensely important, immensely powerful that graduates understand the nature and power of working relationships and how decision-making gets done in these complex real-world environments. Next slide, please. So we offer just 1 degree at undergraduate level now. It's got the it's a Bachelor of Arts and Sciences. I set up the first of these in the UK at UCL, which we now like to call the other university in London. You may have heard of it. It's 180 years old. I very much hope in 175 years we'll be as established as UCL. A bit of a way to go yet, but you don't start a university unless you want to be around in 100 years, I think. Anyway, I set up the first of those in this country. You know, there's a lot in common with that university and the liberal arts programs in the States. It does have some original things. It has a very large core of interdisciplinary modules. There's a little bit of this sort of porosity I've just mentioned, but much less than I've been able to do at LIS. So anyway, with this kind of nomenclature, it's not a Bachelor of Arts, it's a Bachelor of Science, it's both, and students have to do both arts and sciences. That's very important. So that exists in our kind of ecosystem. So at LIS, we now offer 1 degree in that, and it has a rather unsexy title of, it's a Bachelor of Arts and Sciences in Interdisciplinary Problems and Methods. The great value of that is it's exactly what it is. I think we've really had a marketing problem with that title. And I think that's why the undergraduates hasn't taken off quite as well as it could have done. We're growing now and it's solid, but we should have more students. And I think that isn't a sexy title. And we're thinking of just tweaking it purely for kind of visibility reasons so that a student in a school can understand they can study sustainability, or they can study technology and AI and ethics, or they can study poverty and economics as complex problems. So we'll take it 1 level down of generality, I think, so that young people can see themselves more in this space. But that's the title of the degree as it stands, and we've had it for a while. It's a 3-year undergraduate degree, similar structure to normal degree programs. No exams. We do all coursework, mixture of group work and individual work. So that's what that little graphic underneath shows. We teach through real-world problems. We have multiple perspectives on the problems. We also have a bunch of kind of meta skills we teach alongside the problems, things like stakeholder management, how to frame a problem, various sorts of communication, and so on. And we try to link the problems to the world of work. I think in my next slide, if we could have it, there's much more detail on this, so I can explain that in more detail. If we go to the next slide now. Yeah, now forgive me, this might be very hard to read unless you can blow up your screen, but I'll go through it very slowly. This is a graphic really of how the term in the first term looks. So you can multiply this again by 2nd term, 1st year, 1st term, 2nd year, 2nd term, 2nd year, and so on. So you'll see at the top, we have the first problems module, which is about inequality. And the meta skill we teach there is framing, how to frame the problem. And then I'm not sure you can make out, but the slightly lighter colors are the disciplinary perspectives. So we'll teach maybe how a philosopher thinks about inequality, how...
Carl, I'm really sorry, just because it's a key slide in terms of visualization of the curriculum. So again, that's term, 2nd term of the 2nd year, right?
The 1st term of the 1st year.
That's the 1st term of the 1st year, and it has 10 weeks, for example. Right? I see. So exactly, that's just for clarification. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely right. So the terms go 10 weeks is term 1, 10 weeks is term 2, and 7 weeks is term 3. It's a shorter week. And in the 7-week summer term, students all do an independent project. So that's quite unusual, but we expect them from the first year to already be doing their own research. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But let's go through this slide slowly. So you're right. So problems 1A shows you the first problem we look at, which is inequality. Students are introduced to inequality at quite a high conceptual level. We'll have, as I mentioned, external people come in, and they'll have every external will have a slightly different take on inequality. So they might have health inequality, which we had during COVID, the different uptake of vaccines from various different ethnic groups. They might have financial inequality, whatever. And gradually, towards the sort of midpoint of the module, students are refining their own problem statement related to the big problem theme. So in the end, the students, actually it's groups of students work in groups on the problem. They're refining a particular problem statement related to inequality, but they might be very different. So one of them might look at local health inequalities with regard to vaccine uptake. One of them might look at national health inequalities with regard to mental health provision. One of them might look at financial inequality with regard to working class communities in north of England. Anything, but inequality is where they start from. So they get high level concepts of inequality, they narrow it down in their groups to a particular problem statement. And then if you see those sort of more apricot colored things, I'm sorry, the graphics are a little bit too small, but you can see maybe just work out political economy across the three squares, and below that network science. Those are disciplinary perspectives, and the students can choose one of those perspectives on the problem. And they are working in groups of 4 or 5. So the group itself gets quite a rich perspective because the 2 people in the group might do political economy and 2 or 3 might do network science. Then we have a week on integration, which is a long story. I haven't got time to explain that today, but we have a lot of material around integration now, both conceptual and practical, some tools, systems thinking plays a part, but concept mapping as well, and some other things. And of course, this is a long journey. You don't learn that stuff in a term or even a year. Only by the 3rd year, when we do a big compulsory mixed methods and interdisciplinary module, will the students really bring together all the integrative tools, but we have to introduce them early on. And then they go around the disciplinary cycles again in the problems, and they present some piece at the end. Sometimes it's a presentation, sometimes it's a little report. If we drop down to just below the middle white line now, and I won't talk about these in nearly so much detail, we have quantitative methods and qualitative methods. That's a really important distinction. It's the only distinction in the methods. We just say we're going to teach you lots of methods. Half of them are in this pot we call qualitative. Half of them are in this pot we call quantitative. In a sense, the quantitative is easier to explain because we've leaned very heavily into data science as our scientific tool. We don't do any lab sciences. We've currently no intention to. We believe, I think correctly, that good understanding of data science, of Python coding, natural language processing can get you very far in the sciences and social sciences these days. So we have a lot on that. And we teach students how to use that throughout the first year. Every student has to do that, the 2 terms, and they have to also use some of that in their independent project. And then the 2nd to 3rd year, they have optionality and can go quite deeply into that if they want. And we also do some more traditional mathematical modeling as well for the really mathematically minded. On the qualitative method side, there's much more to do, which raises some problems because in the first year, we can only give tasters, but we'll do things like ethnography, survey design, focus groups, close reading, and we have a lot of visual methods. In fact, the 2nd term is devoted to qualitative visual methods, infographics, video making, and so on. So very much a taster in the first year, particularly in qualitative methods, and students can in the 2nd year decide to go either into more qualitative methods or more quantitative methods. But the idea is we give them these tools, which then they can use in an interdisciplinary way on any problem they like within reason. Obviously, we're not turning out quantum physicists. That's not the point. But we are turning out social researchers and to some extent, science researchers in things like sustainability or environmental science who have the tools to do research in a very wide area of things. And we think and we believe that both the quantitative and the qualitative can always add value when used correctly to all those types of complex problems. One more line that's important. Above the white line, we have a thing called coaching, which is our modern take on academic tutoring, but it's done in groups. So particularly when the groups are all working together towards a final product, a report or presentation, that's a very valuable meeting with an academic member of staff every week. And it's very well crafted by a young academic member of staff here who takes that, sort of sets a menu, if you like, an itinerary for each coaching session, which is partly pastoral, but also very nicely guided through the learning of the problem, recap, reiteration, connection making, critiquing towards the assessment in the problems module at the end of the term. So that coaching is an hour a week per group. So that's basically the big picture of the curriculum for the first 2 years.
Just a second. I know about Dara. I understand it, this picture, except integration. Could you say a few words about integration? What's going on there when?
It's such a big topic, Isaac.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's no one answer to that. So we have an academic member of staff, actually our philosopher, who works on integration in interdisciplinary work. And his headline news, if you like, is that integration is the methodology of interdisciplinarity. I like it. It's very simple, but you can see that simplicity hides a multitude of things. So the question's a bit like asking me, you know, what is mathematics in this field of mathematics, or what is mathematical methodology? Now, you know better as well as I do what that kind of is, but it's still quite hard to explain in a nutshell. You could talk about proof, you could talk about deduction. So let me try not to just obfuscate. So for sure, integration in interdisciplinarity can have a very practical manifestation. Your integration might simply be the product, the report, the video, the intervention that you do as a result of your interdisciplinary preliminary work. In one way, that's a very nice outcome. That's a very honest answer. And if your product for the real world is deemed to have value by the real world, then you've done a successful interdisciplinary integration for your public. That answer doesn't satisfy academics very much because they want some kind of theoretical top-down of how you've got the neoclassical economists to talk to the ethnographer, to talk to the data scientist, and so on. And I'm sympathetic to that. That is a much longer answer. I would say, though, we have a bunch of tools which assist in that sort of work, not least of which is systems thinking. Do you know about systems thinking and causal loop diagramming and so on? So we teach that as a tool which we encourage students to use to connect all sorts of different approaches to what they're doing. We also run mixed methods research seminars, which draws on the mixed methods methodology, which is not strictly interdisciplinarity, but it's a bridge between multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, that you can have like concurrent qualitative and quantitative research, or sequential, where the qual can be quantified, then the quantified asks questions of the qual, and so on. But I've probably given you sort of 60% of an answer now, and I think without getting lost, maybe we'll come back to it later. We got one more slide. Shall I just wrap up?
Actually, can I ask a follow-up here? So both Isaac and I are familiar with similar approaches, especially those that take roots somewhere in Soviet like pedagogy. There is really robust stuff there, and it's extremely difficult to explain. It's notoriously difficult to explain unless you actually try it. It's impossible.
Well, thank you for helping me out there.
So I can relate, but that's not a follow-up question. But we still want to understand how it feels. So could you try to maybe tell us about a day of a student who is going through specifically this part of the curriculum?
Actually, I think the best way to answer this, and you're right, Dara, it's difficult, but it shouldn't be that difficult, right? We all need to work at making this easier. Otherwise, it's hard to sell sell what you're selling if you can't explain it well. I think the capstones for me, so in the final year, students do a whole year-long project. And I think the capstones for me are the best examples of integration. They don't give you a single answer, but in every individual case, you can see how some kind of integration was essential to the success of the project. So one of my favorite, probably the most intellectual one, was a piece that looked at how humans perceive abstraction in fine art. And this student looked at something called Harlick features, which are basically ways of quantifying through pixelation various images. And at the same time, they did a lot of qualitative research, both art historical, looking at sort of classical analysis of pictures by great art historians, but also more modern kind of focus groups about, literally, do you think this is an abstract image, or what do you see here, and so on. And then they were able to sort of pixelate the images as well, and then kind of abstract them using an algorithm which gradually made them more and more abstract. And the sum of this work was a very rich piece in which we asked, I think it's actually genuinely novel, undergraduate work, but I think genuinely novel could probably be a PhD. You could go straight on to PhD. We have the first foothold in understanding exactly at what scale of abstraction or pixelation numerically, I mean, we can put a number on it, humans start to feel that something becomes abstract. And that is fascinating and clearly very interdisciplinary. And clearly that work is an integrated interdisciplinary work using art historical analysis, human perception, psychology, data science, and so on.
But Carl, that's a product. So we're still not getting to how you teach to do that. And we see that integration is right there at the center of the slide. So it's not a capstone, at least according to this drawing that you have here. And that's why Isak and I are triggered and we keep asking that, like, we are drawn to it. Why is it in the middle? Is it in the middle because that's where, when you are introduced basic principles?
So in the first year, first term, right, students are completely bewildered by all this and it's completely lost. So that would be very basic. That first big blob, which will be in week 4 or 5 of the year, wouldn't you have systems thinking? It might literally be they'll go to a board and draw a mind map. And in fact, I did this today with some students who are all doing different projects. And they said, we love doing this now, we love doing this. And they all wrote on the board the themes of their projects and the methods they're using to tackle the problems. These were second years. And they said, can we just see if we can find some connections between all the themes? And one student was working on the health sector and doing a game theoretic model between patient and practitioner of when a practitioner would be willing to take risks in prescribing lesser known treatments and when the patient would be willing to take those risks. Lovely project in itself, right? Another student was doing work on people who've young people who've experienced what we call care in this society, i.e., they've not had normal parental backgrounds. They've been put into the state's kind of institutions to look after them, and the connection between those people and their trajectory onto higher education. And another student is doing something completely different on urban design, particularly hospital waiting rooms. Anyway, I won't tell the whole story, but the students love making these connections between aspects of health on the one hand, the social on the other, the physical environment in the one case. Gatekeepers was a theme that came up. So it's a type of brainstorming at the very basic level in this first year where you just say to the students, what are the connections here? What can you see that integrates across this piece? So you're not just got these disparate themes with no connection. And they like this. They think it's a habit they formed. They seek it out, and they literally feel it integrates their thinking into something bigger than it was before. So that's, if you like, kind of absolute level 1, the sort of thing I'm sure we've all done. Maybe we haven't actually, but we've all sat by a whiteboard where someone's drawn things on a whiteboard and said, how do you integrate these things? How do you connect these things together? But then, of course, we go through the gears, and we start talking about mixed methodology, which I've already mentioned. We'll start talking systems thinking, which I've already mentioned. And we then insist that their final year capstones show some kind of integration in the way that I've just said, in the sense that the product could not have been achieved without them using both a quantitative and a qualitative method. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure that satisfies you. There's yeah, we could talk about semiotics, we can talk about mastery. I don't know, what do you want to do?
Let's move forward, because otherwise we'll just be discussing it for hours.
Yeah, I guess we got some ideas. So it's
An inkling.
Yeah, for me it was very important that you mentioned that there are different already existing methodologies to put together different disciplinary perspectives, and this integration part is exactly about that. Great.
And the synthesis is actually the theory of interdisciplinarity.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Well, so my colleague likes to distinguish between integration and synthesis. It's maybe fighting over semantics, but he says that synthesis is the verb that until you achieve the integration. But yeah, we can maybe finesse that. Let me come back to it. There's things bubbling up in my mind that I can tell you about, but they feel a bit piecemeal. Should we get to the end of the presentation, then I can we'll see where we go. So yes, I want to tell you about the challenges of a new university. We are very small. We really struggle to be visible. I underestimated when I started here the value of prestige in a university. Universities are inherently extremely conservative places, actually, despite academics thinking they're radical. And the public looks to universities as a place of prestige, established prestige. And we have very fine academics here, people from UCL, LSE, Harvard, Oxford, almost exclusively elite places our academics come from, but they're not household names. They're not people who have written books you will know. They're not world-leading researchers. They tend to be very, very well qualified and been excellent academics. So it's hard to sell a new university when you don't have that kind of background. And that's something I think anyone starting a new university really needs to think about. The students and the public think of university as an establishment organ. And so there's an inherent contradiction in trying to be a new university. You're either kind of, Google or something new and funky, an app, or you're a university. And when you try to be somewhere in that massive spectrum, it's hard, and that's been hard. So yeah, the conservatism in the HU sector has been really tough. I think on the whole, my colleagues are really generous about what we're doing. They're fascinated. A lot of them want to be involved. I've given lots of keynotes about this, but and they're not trying to kill us, really. We're not a threat. We're too small. But the sector really, really struggles to innovate itself. So there are very few things that people can compare us to, and that makes it hard. We're going alone. There's an ecosystem. We're really outside it. We're trying to be in it and change it. We're sort of outside it, and that's quite difficult for an organism to survive like that. And in this country, we have this terribly narrow school system. It's less bad on the continent and Russia and places, but we still, students are set up at school to go to university. Academics are choosing students on the basis of their school specialisms because they teach them their own specialism, and that's all they really care about. And that creates a tremendously difficult path dependence to break. Conceptually and practically and so on. So it is challenging. We have a partnership now with a French university, which is really helpful to us. M. Lyon, the business school, invested a lot of money. But we will need to recruit more students, I think, to have a long-term future. So we're looking at all those different ways I mentioned, masters, professional development, and so on, to do that alongside the undergraduate. We all want to very much stay in an undergraduate institution. We like the undergraduates. We think that's where the need actually really is. The need is to break that conservatism of narrow disciplinarity and to think about new concepts and new structures, which we would like more graduates to have. But that is what's difficult to change, actually. The masters isn't so difficult. We get lots of people who are interested in the masters. They've reached that stage in life where they realize they need that sort of education. And it's therefore the challenge of the undergraduate that we really like. So we're going to stick with that. So that's enough from me, with a bit of a diversion into some aspects of integration, which I'm happy to come back to now. But over to the floor, I guess.
Carl, so Isaac and I had a little behind the scenes chat, divided the questions. I got the first two. Lucky me. So you mentioned that your institution is the first degree granting higher education institution since Warwick, which was founded in '65, and was actually a part of this large wave, not just European, but worldwide, of innovative higher education institutions. So my first question is about the future. Do you think that London Interdisciplinary School could be the harbinger of a new wave in the UK?
Well, I really love to think so, Dara, but I've been wrong for 15 years about this. So don't listen to me, as they say. You know, I mean, that's not quite true. I'm being too modest now. But when I set up the BASc at UCL, there's a lot of skepticism about that, and it was a fantastic success, and it's gone from strength to strength since I've left, actually, which is great. There's nothing better than a founder seeing the thing really flourish after you leave. I think that I've learned that quite late, that's a sign that you did the right things initially. But what I thought that's a big success at UCL. That's a big deal at UCL. It's a big degree. I thought that would mean other universities would be brave enough to do the same, particularly the other Russell Group universities, the elite in this country, because they saw UCL attracting fantastic students from all over the world, you know, in their hundreds, or even, I think they might even get 1,000 applicants a year now for that. And they take nearly 200, 180. You know, they're rejecting world-class students for that program. So you think that Warwick and even Oxford and so on would think, yeah, well, let's have some of that. It's different. It's really contemporary, it's exciting, but no one else did it. So that really surprised me. You had some liberal arts programs. No one else was brave enough to insist on the science and arts components, which I did, and I fought some tough battles for that at UCL. And that was amazing. That's where the value came, when you had these brilliant students studying both those things until graduate level and excelling in both. That was so exciting. Going on to PhDs and everything else. So I don't know why that didn't happen. And I left there because I sort of felt my work was done to set up this place, which is similar but different. It's more practical, more practice oriented. It's a more radical curriculum that has roots in that. But I just don't see anyone else doing it. And my actual answer to this is kind of really humdrum and a bit kind of sad, but I think it's true, is that I actually don't think it matters very much what you study at university, because when you leave to become a sales manager, a policy person, a council member, all the things our graduates actually do in the world, which are about 90% of graduate jobs, it's got nothing to do with what you studied at university. Very, very little. As you must know, in the UK, all the economists studied history or classics at Oxford. Hardly any of them do economics degrees. Lawyers typically do English literature or something like that. And it just doesn't matter. You take a year of graduate retraining if you need it, and you go and do what you do. So because it doesn't matter that much, people think, well, you know, we don't really need to change very much because you can do anything after studying anything. And that is definitely suboptimal, to use the scientific phrase. And it's definitely, I think, bad for thousands of students who miss out on a more progressive and developmental education, which encourages them to see multiple perspectives, which educates them in arts and sciences. And I think we need that in our society. In this country, again, it varies by country, but in this country, there's an astonishing lack of scientists in our government. I mean, it's outrageous how few people understand science and engineering in the British Parliament. And that's all because of this stupid siloed system we have. But to return to my central point, the fact is they're all in the House of Parliament. They didn't need to study engineering or sciences. They got there by studying classics and PPE. So I think that's really, really hard to change. People, generally, social systems change when there's a crisis. And there is no crisis in the UK. The only crisis we see is that some students now are thinking, what's the financial point of this? I was speaking to an Uber driver yesterday who had a degree, a science degree from a major university, now doing an Uber driver, and he's building his own secondhand car business. He's in his early 30s. And I said to him, is there any point when you go into university? He said, no, complete waste of time. I'm 50, 60,000 pounds in debt. Don't use any of it. And he's actually ended up studying finance. I said, even for a car business, you don't use your finance? He said, no, I can do it all myself with the internet. It's just adding up and taking away. So yeah, we've got a strange situation, very suboptimal for all sorts of reasons, but not bad enough to change. And I think the only thing that's going to change the British system is if students actually stop coming to university in the hundreds of thousands because they don't see the point. But this is culturally specific. I know on the continent, for example, in the Netherlands, I know the system well. You have to do a master's really to get a professional job. So everyone's thinking, what does my undergraduate lead on to in terms of masters? Even if, as I would contend, most graduate jobs in the Netherlands now are like any advanced capitalist economy. They're non-specific. They are a mixture of skills, and you learn them pretty much on the job. As long as you've got some basic numeracy and some basic literacy and some other skills, you learn a lot of that on the job. We still fetishize being a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Those constitute somewhere between 10 and 15% of all graduate jobs. And that's what we fetishize, and that's what we set up our entire system to do. So the short answer is I would love to see more of this. I think the students benefit so much, and I think society benefits from having these more rounded and polymathic graduates, but it's going to take a crisis for it to happen.
Well, let's hope for a crisis. I still have my second question though. So Carl, a couple of months ago, we had the pleasure to host Hannah Anderson from Roskilde University Center in the past, and they run an PBL in their own personal methodology. I believe it's project-based problem learning, if I'm not mistaken, a problem-based project learning.
Yeah.
I hope Rector Anderson forgives me. Now, in our audience, we've got Daniel Kankowski, who is an expert in liberal arts. And you mentioned PPE just several minutes ago. So could you try to position your methodology, your pedagogy among this multiversum of connected approaches?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, Roskilde have been doing this for decades and probably quite far ahead of us. And now there are all these nuances in the Netherlands as well between problem-based, project-based, the master system, and so on. I mean, we don't try to codify that too much. We have our system now, our things we want to teach. But I mean, there's a paradox at the heart of all this, that interdisciplinarity is supposed to be kind of self-subverting, constantly regenerating its own raison d'etre, and if you get too template focused, I think you do start to kill that. I mean, we're at risk of that because we already have quant and qual, and I have a very brilliant colleague here who hates that distinction. He doesn't want to distinguish between quantitative and qualitative methods, but I insist on it for sort of mental hygiene, particularly of students. But no, to your question, I mean, I was asked this on a TV show not that long ago, and I said, if you're setting up PPE today, instead of in 1924 when it's set up in the UK, it's 100 years old and people still think it's a radical. It's pre-Second World War and people still go, ooh, you're not doing just politics, you're doing economics as well. Wow. You know, what would you think about in a modern PPE degree? And we haven't set out to do that, but I do think that asks a very important question of what are the fundamental things which you think a kind of society leader and problem solver would know. And I do think that has, not even subconsciously, kind of between subconscious and conscious, informed my thinking about the core curriculum in both courses I've done. It's why I've insisted on data science for 15 years. Yes, that's changing with AI, but I was right to insist on it for a long time. It's why I've insisted on a balance of quant and qual, because I can't see any leader or even researcher actually really ignoring either aspect of those things. If you're a scientist and you ignore the qualitative, you're a danger to humanity, in my view. And you certainly won't get much headway with policymakers and so on if you can't explain the political and ethical dimensions to your work. And of course, the other way around is terrible, I say, in this country, the humanistic people who don't understand anything about sciences. So yeah, so what is the bedrock that those sorts of people need? And I think coding and data science is one thing. Some range of qualitative research methods is another. And I've been convinced actually more recently by my colleague here, Maria Angelica Madero, an artist, that we are actually in a visual age now. I was very sold on it being a sort of algorithmic age, but Maria describes how in the medieval time, you know, people would take a pilgrimage to see an image. Otherwise, the only thing you'd have seen was your reflection in the water. There was no glass. So the magical property of this single image. And now the dynamic is so inverted, it's impossible to really comprehend. We are flooded with images, and now all fake images as well. And we have very little literacy about that. We don't understand how we're being manipulated, or indeed how to manipulate other people. So I think a kind of visual literacy alongside a numerical or data science and some qualitative, basic sort of word-based literacies are what you would include in your modern PPE degree. So if the liberal sciences lot want to take that, I'd be all up for it. I don't see that. I see quite a lot of conventionality in liberal arts courses, even universities like Minerva, which I love. I love their first year curriculum. I think that's really smart. They basically default to a major minor system in the second and third, fourth year. And I don't think that's brave enough of them. They're very brave in their first year. And more worked out maybe than we've been, but after that they default to major minor, and I'm like, surely you could have been braver about what are the core things you want students to learn. It doesn't have to be just existing disciplines. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, methods. I mean, we talk about methods, and liberal arts don't really talk about methods. We can argue just as we can argue about what integration is, we can argue about how you actually divorce methods from knowledge, and it's subtle, and perhaps you can't entirely, and often the knowledge comes from the methods used to try to find the knowledge, right? But the last 30 years have shown us that, for example, applying ethnographic methods, ostensibly set up to study quite remote peoples in different countries, can be used very productively in right next door, you know, in a local bank or in a design company or in political surveying. And similarly, quantitative methods, and we see now we can apply them through natural language processing, for example, to sentiment analysis. So you can take a method where it was seemingly much more siloed and only used to attack or investigate one set of data, and you can actually point it at other data and find interesting things out. So that's very different. LIS is emphasis on methods to normal liberal arts courses.
Thank you.
Very interesting, Dara. I have a couple of questions before the end, and my questions, but I will follow up for a second what Carl just said, because I also was thinking, what's new we have here compared with other PBL, etc. These, I guess, Carl is correct, obviously, these emphasis on methods. And methods require, to study methods, you need to study a lot. It's not just conversation about a problem. I'm amazed with a couple of my colleagues who understand, for example, experimental design in social sciences. And this experimental design is not very different from environmental sciences or even from the biology. So I guess it's very interesting. Maybe we even can use a different name, not problem-based, but methods-based learning.
Yeah, you raised some really important points though, Isaac. I mean, for one thing, we do have a colleague who's very uncomfortable with how superficial our introduction to qualitative methods is, because she says they're just not doing this enough to, particularly in the first year. And I sort of have to calm her down by saying, yeah, okay, but they can do a whole 15 or 30 credit module that in the second year. This is just a taster. But I am sensitive to that criticism. I think it's less so in data science, because once you've got over the initial fear of using Python and pandas, you can actually do some very good descriptive or inferential statistics. But you're right, and particularly arts methods. I mean, they take a long time. And that's actually one reason we don't do it on our professional development, because they're much shorter courses. Mm-hmm. We say to them, look, we cannot teach you a method in 7.5 hours of contact time over 5 weeks or whatever. So we'll just teach you the concepts. And there's a bit of disgruntlement, because the methods are where a lot of the intellectual firepower is really, and it does take time. It's a practice. You're right.
Yeah. Okay, but I have very simple question. You described first and the second year, and what happens in the third year, and connecting to this, because there was something about the work. Last couple of decades, we hear about employability, a mantra of employability. And where London Interdisciplinary School is in this discussion of employability and what are the trajectories of your graduates? You have first graduates last year.
Yeah, so I mean, as I say, I think this may be country specific, but I think, how can I think Britain is right not to fuss too much over what undergraduates study, because I believe in advanced knowledge economies, the work people do has very little to do with the details of an academic subject. There will be things you can take from any academic subject, whether it's, keeping good order in your mathematics reasoning to writing essays, and apply it to your graduate job. But I think a lot of the insistence, even in Europe, let alone I think when you go to Russia or China, a lot of insistence on specific academic disciplines is just laziness, legacy thinking, because that's what it always was. And also it was because, of course, don't forget, many fewer people went to university. So you sort of, it didn't matter because 85% of people weren't going to university. They were doing apprenticeships, which were more relevant to the job. So you would train up people to become academics or very narrow specialists, but that's just not the case now. We're approaching 50% in so many economies. And you do have just ridiculous situations where people are studying a geography degree to be an estate agent. It's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, but what about the third year? Sorry for interruption.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So 4 minutes.
Yeah. So, let me quickly answer the question about employment. So our graduates do everything. They do everything. We got someone working Goldman Sachs, which is a plum job and a fantastic salary. We got somebody working for a green energy company. We got someone working for a tech startup in AI. We got someone in education. But they're doing everything. And the only thing they're not doing are being a dentist, a lawyer, or an aeronautic engineer. But you name me any other job and they're doing it. Okay. So in the third year, they have a lot of optionality. So we have a bunch of electives, and they can go basically much deeper into either the data science stuff, or the math modeling, or the qualitative stuff, which can be more on the ethnography side. We have a great course in ethnography, or more on the visual side. And that's the third year. So they get really good at one set of methods and sort of like a minor in another set of methods. And then they do a capstone the whole year where they have to combine 2 methods they've learned on this course. And that brings us back to integration, which I'm aware I didn't perhaps answer as incisively as I could, but through some explicit mixed methodology or through some explicit description of a product that couldn't have been made without that integration, they have to integrate 2 methods that they've learned.
Super, very interesting. And again, it says again more on the focus on the methods. It's a pity we have just 2 minutes for the last question, and I know Dara has it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, Carl, so we have a traditional last question. You lead an innovative university, and you're not alone. There are others like you. And summer is upon us. So what are your recommendations for other leaders of innovative universities? What should they be doing during the summer?
Great question. I saw that question. I'm a triathlete. Did you guys know that?
No.
I'm in Team GB for my age group, and it comes back to Isaac's question about what is my personal integration. Triathlete's perfect for me because I'm not the best at swimming, running, or cycling, but I'm in the top, 4 or 5 in every race. So put them together and you get to the top, which is a fantastic metaphor for many of our students. Another whole story I could tell you about my graduates, what they're doing is they are unique niche specialists by combining 3 or 4 or 5 disciplines into a specialism which nobody has. And there's a great number. A student himself worked out a great number for this. If you're in the top of 25%, which isn't that hard to be, of 4 or 5 disciplines, you compound that, you're in the top 0.0025% of people who combine those disciplines. Anyway, sorry. So to say, back to the main point, because I can't stop talking about education now. I think people should chill out in summer. I think they should do something in nature, do sport, read things that refresh them, try and get away from the grind of admin at university. So yeah, take the tension off, let your mind expand, let your bandwidth expand, particularly if you want to innovate. You've got to come at things fresh and be brave. And if you're really leading university, everyone will know there's so much admin and personality stuff to deal with. Forget all that. Go and swim in the open water, read some novels, that sort of thing.
Carl, as an ultra runner, I support you fully and completely.
Wow.
It's the best advice.
Cool. Where do you run? In the mountains?
Everywhere.
Nice.
But yes, I prefer hills, like fell running, trail running. But anyway, Isaac, let's finalize because we'll get out of
Edit
control.
that bit.
Yeah, we thank you very much, Carl. And this is very nice finale of our season. And our conversation doesn't stop here. Connect with us, look at our YouTube channel, and see you next academic year.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I very much appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.